whenever you're screwing in corrugated tin, you want to make sure the screw goes into the valleys, not up here, or it's just going to crunch it. I'm going to say this is the top. I'm not going to screw all the way into the bottom because I'm going to have a bottom trim piece that goes along here. So I'm going to get the first two, go down there, and then we'll attach the bottom later. I'm going to do that to the very end piece, and then I'm going to space the two middle supports evenly at 4 feet on the centers. I'm going to do the same thing to the other side, and then we'll come back and we'll put it all together. I've almost got all the posts screwed in. I just have one left to do. So I'm measuring 4 foot on center. The post is here. I'm just sort of scooting it. I'm not taking too much time with it. All right, so now, while it's down, it probably would be more efficient just to go ahead and put the bottom trim pieces on. We can go ahead and do that. For that, I've got some cedar. I already ripped these up to 5 inches wide. If you didn't want to use cedar, you could perfectly just as well use treated pine. I happen to have a lot of cedar that I'm residing my wood shop with. I had some left over, so I'm going to use that. On the bottom trim, I'm going to use a 2.5 inch exterior screw. Since I'm using 8 foot sections, I'm going to have to splice a 4 foot section down there. If I do that on this side, I'm going to do just the opposite, just to stagger the joints. Before I put a second one, I'm going to go down here and make sure it's lined up the way that I want, because once you put a second one, it's going to be a little bit hard to adjust. Now I'm lining this thing up with the bottom of the 4x4, not the bottom of the tin. This tin's going to sink into the ground. If you didn't want to do that, you could just make it flush. But I've got a lot of bahia grass, I've got a lot of weeds, and so I want this to be definitely in the ground. All right, now I can put the rest of them in. So now I've got the bottom trim on my 2 side pieces all screwed in. It's all fastened. My 2 sides are ready to go. I'm going to stand this thing upside down simply because my top sheet metal in relation to the post is flush. Here, like I said, I've got a bit of a lip. I've got very sandy soil. This is going to dig in. It's going to leave no gaps. If you don't have sandy soil and a relatively flat ground, you may want to cut this flush. And in fact, that's the way I indicated in my plans. So this is the reason I'm doing it this way. Now, because I'm building this on a concrete floor, I know this thing is probably sitting straight up. If I were building this on site, you can't rely on your ground being perfectly perpendicular to your post. So what you do in that case is, you know this is a straight cut. Make sure your ends line up and you'll know you'll have this properly lined. I'm going to put a couple of screws in this. On the top. Now we're just going to attach the bottom trim on the ends, flip it over and square it up, and put the top trim. So now we've got it all together. The only thing that's missing is the top trim. And this trim is going to both help it from bowing out from the weight of the dirt. It's also going to give you a place to sit while you do your gardening. For that reason, the top trim is a 2x4, not a 1x4. So how do you tell if something is square? This big. You could get a square, measure a tiny little corner if you could, but that's probably not going to be your best way. So you're going to make sure your diagonals are the same, using the right side of the tape measure. To the right side of the tape measure is 152 inches. Same thing over here. Maybe. Right side. $151 1/4. So that means this is shorter. So what you want to do is you want to push this that way. That'll decrease the distance between that diagonal. It'll increase the distance by that diagonal. We're off by 3/4 of an inch. So we just want to move this 3/8 of an inch. And I'm just picking a line on the ground and just eyeballing it. Measure again. 151, about a half. Close enough for me for what this thing is. So now, what we're going to do is we're going to take I used treated 2x4s. I got 12 foot, I've got 8 foot, and I'm going to miter these corners so that I get both pieces on the same piece of wood. So that's going to make it a little bit more rigid. Now that we've got 2 of the side trim pieces cut, we're going to line one up on this corner. Make sure it lines up on the other corner, and it does. We're going to go ahead and fasten one screw, just one screw, because if you need to make an adjustment, one screw acts as a pivot. If you put 2, it makes a little bit more stress on the wood. Pull it to the edge. All right, and you notice we've got a big gap here. And that's because there's a slight bow here. Even though the piece is square, the center part is bowed out somewhat. What you want to do to correct for that, if there's a bow in this wood or what have you, and you want it, just sort of kick it in and fasten it this way. If that means there's a slight inward bow to this piece, so be it. Put one screw in. Come over here, do the same thing. Take out the gap, there you go. All right, so now we're going to put our end pieces on. It's basically done. We're going to wait for tomorrow morning, and we'll take this out to the garden, situate it, fill it up with dirt, and go from there. We're going to use these micro sprays. They come in different patterns. different configurations. We're going to plant them, put these into the ground pretty low so they don't spray over the thing. That's one of the reasons we didn't fill this planter up. You only need about 6 inches of soil. This will just tap into that poly. Another option you have is you can get adjustable drippers. This is 0 to 14 gallons per hour. You just turn this thing and it puts out more and more water in sort of a fan pattern. The other option, depending on what you're planting, is to get these pressure compensating drippers. This is 2 gallons per hour. You can get 1 gallon per hour in different configurations. I don't like these. I've used several of these and they tend to just stop flowing for some reason. Just about killed several of my blueberry plants. So I use these. I have not really had any trouble with these clogging up or anything like that.